Hi everybody, it's Mr. Sean. Well, since we're not able to meet today, I've prepared a YouTube video for you of what I would have said if I had been there, pretty much. And I put some videos in there for you to watch as well and reviewed the chapter 4 that we're going to be on. I'll let the video speak for itself, but I just want to let you know we're going to be doing this for the next 3 weeks. I'll prepare a video. We may even try to meet live if that's suitable. I think this gives you a lot more flexibility to be able to watch the video whenever you want. You can stop it and start it. You can watch it again, whatever you need to do. So in any case, here it is, and I'll look forward to checking in with you again next week. Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Apologetics. This is our first ever online, or my first ever online apologetics class for ILA. I have taken some classes like this while I was at Biola, and they're pretty cool actually. It gives you a little more flexibility. You can watch this whenever you want to. If you have questions, you can go back and see what was said. You can also look carefully for misspelled words, which will be of benefit to you in the raffle later. You know what I'm talking about. In any case, we're kind of interrupting, though, because last week we watched the first half of the movie, The Case for Christ, outlining Lee Strobel's journey from an atheist to a Christian. And I intended that today, Monday, we would watch the second half. And I really don't want to do that online because I'd like to do it together and I'd like to be able to talk about it after we've watched it. So what I'm going to do is we're going to suspend that and we'll finish watching The Case from Christ when we return to class after Easter. So as I understand the plan now, we're going to be doing this online for 3 weeks. And then we break for Easter and then we come back after Easter. And at that point, we will then kind of catch up. Hopefully we'll be caught up, but we'll catch up with the Case for Christ movie and get a chance to talk about that. Just a reminder that we're studying Christian apologetics, and Christian apologetics is defending our faith, defending the Christian faith with everything we have for logic and philosophy and facts and science to help people who maybe have an objection to it. Lee Strobel and others have had objections to Christianity, didn't even want to consider it because they thought that science had disproved any need for a God, that with science, it was impossible that there's even a God. They've been misled. And so our job is to help them see that that's not true, and then hope that they will encounter the living Christ and the Holy Spirit will work within them and bring them into the kingdom. It's not our job to do that, but it is our job as apologists to try to help them see that some of the things they've been told, maybe about science, philosophy, or anything else, and so many of them have also, people that are atheists, have been hurt by the church, as you recall, or hurt by someone in the church. And they have a really strange reaction to it because someone in the church hurts them, they will declare themselves to be an atheist. I've told you stories about people I've met on airplanes and other places that tell me stories like that. And that's terrible. Hopefully we can help them with that, help them understand the church may have let them down, a Christian may have let them down, but Christ will never let them down. He's never let me down, even close. So that's kind of part of the message we want to get out. And of course, to do that, we need to be prepared, and that's why we're here. Part of that is putting on the full armor of God, as it says in Ephesians. It tells us to put on the full armor of God, and the full armor of God includes the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the belt of truth, sword of the Spirit, and our feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. And interesting that when they're in Ephesians 6:14 through 17, where it says to stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, then it talks about all the other parts of the armor of God. But I noticed that the very first thing you put on is the belt of truth. Without truth, we're nowhere. If Jesus wasn't resurrected from the dead, if that's not true, then we can all go home. The Apostle Paul even said that. And the truth, I believe, is like a lion. I agree with St. Augustine, who said the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Just let it loose and it'll defend itself. Our job is to let it loose. We don't have to beat it into anyone. We want to be gentle and kind to them and respectful, but just tell them the truth and let it work on them. Now, last week, speaking of the truth, we talked a little bit about the origin of species, and I told you how some of the arguments for the origin of species, that for Darwinian evolution. Now, we talked about several kinds of evolution, and one kind is just where you might breed cattle to develop horses that can run faster, cattle that give more milk, plants that are maybe resistant to some kinds of bacteria. That's one form of evolution, but in every case, you're breeding horses or dogs. You end up with horses, 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 horses. You end up with dogs, 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 dogs. You don't start with a dog and end up with a rhinoceros. And that's what Darwinian evolution is about, is that it claims that we can start from a single cell, very simple animal, although it doesn't explain how that animal gets started from a dead planet in their view. So they're a little deficient there. And then it just sort of goes forth until eventually from this one cell animal, you end up with humans. And they say that happens by random mutations in the cell acted on by natural selection. Well, that was probably an okay or at least a defendable idea back in Darwin's time. There were a lot of people that objected to it even then, but now as we know more and more about molecular science and what's really going on inside the cell, this idea just does not stand up anymore. And scientists know that. For some reason, they're not willing to come out and make much of a public statement about that because it would kind of undo their system of saying everything's materialistic, science can give you all the answers, and as we've discussed, it can't, and that truth is slowly beginning to swallow up Darwin's theory. Now, in fairness to Darwin, back in his day, they didn't know that much about the cell. They didn't know what was going on there at the molecular level, and so they could defend their position a little better than now. But I mentioned the Royal Society has held a meeting of scientists from around the world to discuss the need for a new theory to back this up. They need a theory that's similar to Darwinism in that it doesn't require God, that it's all just natural forces somehow assembling itself into this human and all the other types of life we find on Earth. Well, it turns out that a gent that I've met a few times, his name is Dr. James Tour, kind of puts the lie to this a little bit. Dr. Tour is one of the most quoted scientists in the world. He works with Nobel Prize winners. I've met him a couple of times. He's a professor at Rice University where I studied electrical engineering. And there he is professor of chemistry, computer science, and material science and nanoengineering. That last one is kind of interesting because it's nanoengineering. He builds things with molecules. Nano means 1 billionth. 1 divided by 1 billion meters typically. So to give you an idea what that means, a tennis ball would be 100 million nanometers across, whereas a water molecule would be about 1/2 to 1 nanometer. A nanometer is about the length that a fingernail grows in 1 second. So look at your fingernail, see how much it grows, and that's a nanometer. It's really, really small. Well, Dr. Tour works in that area. He builds molecules for a living. He does something which is kind of interesting. This has nothing to do with apologetics, but it's just cool. He races nano cars. What he does is he builds cars out of molecules. And recently, I guess back in 2017, about 3 years ago, they had a nano car race in Toulouse, France. I don't know if they have these annually or not. I just found the video of this one because he's always talking about racing nano cars in the lab. The course, the length of the whole race was 150 nanometers, really small, about 1,000th of the width of a human hair. And it took the team, the Rice team, about an hour and a half to cover that distance. Other teams that were in the same race, some of them actually, they called the race at 30 hours. They just said, we're going to give up. If you haven't done it by 30 hours, we're calling the race. That's to go across something 1,000th of the width of a human hair with this little molecular car. Now, the implication of this is as they try to build these things out of molecules, they're trying to build things that would go into the bloodstream and find cancer cells one-on-one and go in and kill cancer cells one at a time, as opposed to now where we do chemotherapy, where we put the chemicals in the bloodstream and they kill a lot of other things besides just cancer. So they're working on a lot of really wonderful things. I got a presentation on it in November when I was back at Rice. Good stuff. Anyway, he knows a lot about molecules. And I'm going to show you this little video here first, and then I'm going to show you one that's really serious and does have something to do with what we're talking about in evolution. So take a look at this.
Well, last weekend, 6 teams took to the track in Toulouse in France for the world's first nano car race. The nanocars are specially designed molecules which are invisible to the human eye. Nano things are very, very small. 1 nanometer is 30,000 times thinner than a human hair.
In ideal cases, we try to build molecules which have the shape of a car. That is some kind of chassis and 4 wheels, and ideally a motor. But in some cases, it turns out that much simpler molecule work as well.
6 teams competed, representing France, Switzerland, Japan, Germany, the USA, and there was a joint US and Austrian team. The tiny racetrack for most teams was made of gold. Now, this is because gold is so soft, its surface can be made extremely flat, as in there's not even an atom out of place. And that does take some time to prepare.
Is really eminently qualified to understand what's going on biologically at the molecular level. And he's got a little video here that I'm going to play for you that I want you to watch called I Don't Understand Evolution. In it, he says, and it sounds like he might be being somewhat immodest, but I think that's not true. I think it's just true. He says, if anybody could understand how it works, it's me, and I don't understand it. And he talks about other scientists that he talks to, even including Nobel laureates. He talks to them, and they will admit privately that nobody understands how this works right now. They're trying to come up with some other theories that would be natural and not involve God, but so far they haven't done it. Even the Royal Society, as I mentioned to you last week in England, has convened a conference that says we need to come up with some better idea. They don't want to say that Darwinism is wrong without having something else to put in its place. I think they think it's something like Darwinism is going to replace it, but they just don't know what it is yet. They have some problems. So as you encounter folks that will tell you that Darwinism is settled science, I got to tell you, it's anything but that. You might show them this video. You might refer them to a lot of other places that talk about that it's just not right. Now, maybe they will come up with another theory that we'll have to worry about down the road or we'll have to address. But for now, those that would tell you that Darwinism, and as we talked about last week, a lot of the evidences for Darwinism are just been proven to be not true. And why they keep doing them, I think, is really just to try to keep the legend or the story alive while they scramble to find something else. Anyway, let's take a look at Dr. Tour's video, and then we'll come back.
Hey, what's up, guys? Two School News here, Shea Manners here, and we are here talking about Dr. James Tour, a professor of chemistry, computer science, and material science, and nanoengineering at Rice University. The guy is decorated. He has written over 590 research publications and over 100 patents. Guy is serious. Anyways, in his most recent paper, a 12,000-word essay titled Animad Versions of a Synthetic Chemist, he tackles a question that has puzzled scientists for millennia. And that question is, where did life come from? Interesting question. Basically, he writes, and I'm quoting here, life requires carbohydrates, nucleic acids, lipids, and proteins. And he says here, biologists seem to think that there are well understood prebiotic molecular mechanisms for their synthesis or for their creation, but they have been grossly misinformed. Now, it says here, few biologists have ever synthesized a complex molecule ab initio, meaning from the beginning. If they need a molecule, they purchase molecular synthesis kits, which are, of course, designed by synthetic chemists and which feature simplistic protocols. Polysaccharides, their origin. The synthetic chemists do not have a pathway. The biologists do not have a clue. And basically, they have no idea where life came from. That's the conclusion. They don't know where life came from. They're saying it came from nothing, but it really does nothing. Can life really come from nothing? Come on. Anyways, the last line here, it says the basis upon which we as scientists are relying is so shaky that we must openly state the situation for what it is. It is a mystery. And that's exactly what it is, friends, a mystery. Life is a mystery, but we know who created life, the Lord Jesus Christ. God made life. He is the life giver. In the beginning, God created the.
As far as the biological sense, because also there was this question of evolution, I will tell you as a scientist and a synthetic chemist, if anybody should be able to understand evolution, came back. If anybody should be able to understand evolution, it is me. Because I make molecules for a living. And I don't just buy a kit and mix this and get that. I mean, ab initio, I make molecules. I understand how hard it is to make molecules. I understand that if I take nature's toolkit, it can be much easier because all the tools are already there and I just mix it in the proportions that, and I do it under these conditions. But ab initio is very, very hard. I don't understand evolution. And I will confess that to you. Is it okay for me to say that I don't understand this? Is that all right? I know that there's a lot of people out there that don't understand anything about organic synthesis, but they understand evolution. I understand a lot about making molecules. I don't understand evolution. And you would say that, wow, I must be really unusual. Let me tell you what goes on in the back rooms of science. With National Academy members, with Nobel Prize winners, I have sat with them. And when I get them alone, not in public, because it's a scary thing if you say what I just said. And I say, do you understand all of this, where all of this came from and how this happens? Every time that I have sat with people who are synthetic chemists who understand this, they go, nope. These people are just so far off on how they believe this stuff came together. I have sat with National Academy members and Nobel Prize winners. Sometimes I will say, do you understand this? And if they're afraid to say yes, they say nothing. They just stare at me because they can't sincerely do it. I was once brought in by the dean of the department once, and many years ago, and he was a chemist, and he was kind of concerned about some things. I said, let me ask you something. You're a chemist. Do you understand this? How do you get DNA without a cell membrane? And how do you get a cell membrane without a DNA? And how does all this come together from this? He said, Jim, we have no idea. We have no idea. I said, isn't it interesting that you, the dean of science, and I, the chemistry professor, can talk about this quietly in your office, but we can't go out there and talk about this? If you understand evolution, I am fine with that. I'm not going to try to change you, not at all. In fact, I wish I had the understanding that you have. But about 7 or 8 years ago, I posted on my website that I don't understand. And I said, I will buy lunch for anyone that will sit with me and explain to me evolution, and I won't argue with you until I don't understand something. I will ask you to clarify. But you can't wave by and say, this enzyme does that. You got to get down in the details of where molecules are built for me. Nobody has come forth. The Atheist Society contacted me. The Atheist Society contacted me. They said that they will buy the lunch. And they challenged the Atheist Society, go down to Houston, have lunch with this guy, and talk to him. Nobody's come. Now remember, because I'm just going to ask when I stop understanding what you're talking about, I will ask. So I sincerely want to know. I would like to believe it, but I just can't. Now, I understand microevolution. I really do. We do this all the time in the lab. I understand this. But when you have speciation changes, when you have organs changing, when you have to have concerted lines of evolution all happening in the same place in time, not just one line, concerted lines, all in the same place, all in the same environment. This is very hard to fathom. I was in Israel not too long ago talking with a bioengineer. And he was describing to me the ear. And he was studying the different changes in the modulus of the ear. And I said, how does this come about? He says, oh, Jim, we all believe in evolution, but we have no idea how it happened. There's a good Jewish professor for you. I mean, that's what it is. So that's where I am. Have I answered the question?
Well, so Dr. Tour is pretty passionate about his beliefs there, and he gets really excited sometimes. But he's just so frustrated, I think, that so many people are defending. Now, we're talking about Darwinian evolution. That's not evolution where a bacteria develops an immunity to an antibiotic, or where we breed horses or cattle or even plants to do better things or different things. We're talking about where you start with pretty much a one-cell animal, and we can't really explain where that even comes from, and that over billions of years that somehow becomes a human, going through all kinds of steps from more and more complex animals as we go. So that's what he's talking about. That's what we mean when we say evolution. We're not talking about the other kinds of things that could be defined as evolution, modification with change, and that sort of thing. In any case, let's turn our attention now to fallacies. We talked about a number of fallacies. We defined a fallacy as a failure in reasoning, which renders an argument invalid. We want to watch for these, not only in apologetics and talking about our belief in God or religion. We want to listen for this pretty much anything we hear. Lots of things, particularly on the internet and social media, are just full of fallacies. People using really terrible arguments, but people believe it because it sort of sounds good. We've talked about 4 fallacies so far, and we're going to talk about more. We've talked about the straw man. We've talked about ad hominem fallacies, the red herring, and the circular. I didn't intend to do this quite yet, but since we're doing this online, I'm going to go ahead and show you a video that shows you the top 10 logical fallacies. And we'll be covering most of these in the weeks ahead. But I just wanted to give you kind of a summary again, because I think it's important that you know fallacies exist, how to detect them, and when you do detect them, to even call the person that's trying to put one over on you with it, to point out to them the fallacy in their argument. If they're honest, they'll sort of back down. If they're not, you'll know not to put too much credence into anything they're saying. So let's take a look here real quick at the top 10 logical fallacies.
Hey guys, welcome to this video on logical fallacies. When creating a logical argument, there are many different aspects that have to come together to ensure that your argument is sound and does not contain any flaws. One of these aspects is avoiding what we call logical fallacies. A logical fallacy is an error of reasoning that will weaken your argument and, in most cases, undermine it completely. Today, we're going to look at the 10 most common logical fallacies. Circular reasoning. Circular reasoning or circular argument is when the argument is restated rather than proven. In other words, instead of explaining why something is or isn't true, you just fall back on the original argument as proof. Here's an example. Opium is sleep-inducing because it has a sleep-inducing quality. You haven't really explained why opium is sleep-inducing, you've just confirmed that it is in fact sleep-inducing. A typical formula for circular reasoning is A is true because B is true, and B is true because A is true. Another example of this would be, the wind is invisible because I can't see it, and I can't see it because it's invisible. When constructing an argument, make sure to avoid this kind of logic by being as specific as possible about your proofs. Hasty generalization. A hasty generalization is when someone makes a sweeping statement without considering all of the facts. For example, if a man walks through a town for the first time and sees 10 people, all of them children, he might conclude that all the town's residents are children. This argument fails to explore all of the data surrounding the topic and attempts to suggest a conclusion based on this limited knowledge. This is also known as overgeneralization and is best avoided by exploring and presenting every aspect of an argument's topic. Slippery slope. A slippery slope is a conclusion based on the premise that one small step will lead to a chain of events resulting in some significant event, which is usually negative. In other words, if we allow A to happen, then an unwanted Z will eventually happen, which means that A should not happen. Here's an example. If you don't study on Saturdays, your grades will suffer. If your grades suffer, you won't graduate school with high honors, which means you won't get a good job. Since you won't have a good job, you'll have to live on the streets. This implies that not studying on Saturdays will result in eventually being homeless. The problem here is that the main issue is being covered by extreme hypotheticals with no real proof to support the argument. Straw man. A straw man argument is a technique where someone distorts an opponent's claim so that it's easier to refute, or where someone tries to refute a point someone made by giving a rebuttal to a point they did not make. For example, if someone said schools should be more lenient with standardized testing, a straw man reply to this would be, if we stop giving tests in schools, we are going to raise an ignorant generation that won't have the skills to live in the real world. This fallacy serves to undermine an honest and rational debate with unfounded claims. Ad hominem. An ad hominem is an attack on a person's character or personal attributes in order to discredit their argument. For example, a mother might reject the judgments of a male pediatrician because he has never been a mother and couldn't possibly understand the child's situation. She has done nothing to directly oppose the doctor's argument, but has instead tried to undermine his judgment without actually having to engage with it. False dichotomy. A false dichotomy or false dilemma occurs when an argument presents 2 points while disregarding or ignoring others in order to narrow the argument in one person's favor. This is also known as either-or fallacy. Here are a couple of examples. You were either for us or against us. I thought you were a good person, but you didn't donate to the charity last year. There are only 2 options given when there are really more options available. This attempts to drive the argument in a direction where only one specific answer can be given in order to incriminate the opposing party. Appeal to emotion. An appeal to emotion is when a writer or speaker uses emotion-based language to try to persuade the reader or listener of a certain belief or position. An appeal to emotion generally follows the logical form, X is true. Think of how sad you'll be if it's not true, or think of how happy you'll be if it's true. Example, I deserve a second chance to submit my assignment. This past week was so busy for me. I had football practice late every night, I had tons of homework in all my other classes, and my girlfriend and I just broke up. In general, what someone perceives to be unfair, how someone is feeling, or even things that someone might perceive to be moral or immoral do not carry much weight for making an objective argument. Equivocation. A fallacy of equivocation is when an argument is presented in an ambiguous, double-sided way, making the argument misleading. This is also known as a double-speak fallacy. Here's an example. Hot dogs are better than nothing. Nothing is better than hamburgers. Therefore, hot dogs are better than hamburgers. The word nothing in this case is used to refer to both not anything and all things. It's important to precisely define your words and be consistent with their usage. Bandwagon appeal. A bandwagon appeal is an appeal that presents the thoughts of a group of people in order to persuade someone to think the same way. It argues that one must accept or reject an argument based on peer pressure. Here are 2 examples. Many people buy extended warranties. Therefore, it is wise to buy them. My family holds this as truth. Therefore, everyone who disagrees is simply wrong. These are not strong arguments because they have no basis in fact. False analogy. A false analogy, also known as a weak analogy, is when 2 things that are unalike are being compared based on a trivial similarity in order to prove a point. For example, people are like dogs. They respond best to discipline. This is an absurd analogy that attempts to correlate people and dogs based on one minor similarity. I hope that this video was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe to our channel for further videos. See you guys next time.
Well, we'll talk more about fallacies in the weeks ahead, but I just wanted to give you kind of a preview of some additional fallacies that we might be talking about, and also a quick review of the ones that we have talked about. And in your homework for today, I'm going to ask you to give an example of one of those 4 kinds of fallacies. So hopefully you won't have any trouble doing that. Now let's turn our attention to the main event here, the case for a creator. As you know, there's 2 versions of this book, at least 2. The one on the left here is the sort of the main book, Case for a Creator, and on the right is the student edition. It's shorter and a little bit simplified. That's the one we're using, but I think most of you have the copy of the other one as well. So what I'm going to have you do is I'd like you to have read Chapter 4, and we're going to take a look at the video for Chapter 4. The title of that is The Cosmos on a Razor's Edge, The Evidence for Physics and Astronomy. And if you want to pause the video here before you watch Lee's talk on it, and we talk about it a little bit, go ahead and do that and read the chapter. If not, you can do this first and read the chapter later. So with that, let's take a look at what Lee has to say in his video about On a Razor's Edge.
Since the beginning of time, all the matter in the universe has been governed by precisely balanced laws and constants. During an interview with Robin Collins, a philosopher with degrees in mathematics and physics, Strobel learned how these laws offer compelling evidence for a creator and conspire to make the universe habitable for life.
The laws of physics are balanced on a razor's edge for life to occur. For example, if you didn't have something like gravity that pulled matter together, you would never get planets, you wouldn't get stars, you wouldn't get any complex organisms. If you didn't have the strong nuclear force, there would be nothing to hold protons and neutrons together in the nucleus. And so you wouldn't have any atoms, so no chemistry. If you didn't have the electromagnetic force, you would have no bonding between chemicals. You'd have no light, and the list goes on. So you need all these sorts of fundamental principles have to be in place in order for life to occur. Wipe out one of those principles, wipe out one of those laws, no life.
Strobel learned that life also hinges on the precise strengths and relative values of many different physical constants. One example of this fine-tuning is the force of gravity.
Imagine a ruler divided up into 1-inch increments and then stretched across the entire universe, a distance of some 14 billion light years. For the purposes of illustration, the ruler represents the possible range for gravity. In other words, the setting for the strength of gravity could have been anywhere along the ruler, but it just happens to be situated in exactly the right place so that life is possible. Now, if you were to change the force of gravity by moving the setting just 1 inch compared to the entire width of the universe, the effect on life would be catastrophic.
No large-scale life forms could exist. Anything that was more than the size of a pea would be completely crushed. So you might be able to get life of a very, very primitive sort, such as bacteria, but you could never get conscious observers.
The strength of gravity is just one of at least 30 separate parameters that must be finely tuned to produce a life-sustaining universe. Another example is the cosmological constant.
The cosmological constant describes the expansion speed of space in the universe. If space expands too quickly, then the universe will spread out so quickly that material objects can't form. So you can't get stars and galaxies and planets and the types of things that we, of course, take for granted in our universe.
Physicists have determined that the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 1 part in 100 million billion 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 billion. Such precision has been compared to traveling hundreds of miles into space, then throwing a dart at the Earth and hitting a bullseye measuring 1/trillionth of an inch in diameter, an area less than the width of a single atom.
Just consider those two parameters, gravity and the cosmological constant. Their level of fine-tuning is to a precision of 1 part in 100 million trillion, 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 trillion. I mean, that's like 1 atom in the entire known universe.
This fine-tuning is also evident at the atomic level. The strong nuclear force binds atoms together. If the strength of this force were to decrease by 1 part in 10,000 billion 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 billion, the only element left in the universe would be hydrogen. Again, chemical life would not be possible. The fine-tuning of the laws and forces of physics is so precise that few theorists are comfortable invoking mere chance as an explanation, unless our universe is not the only roll of the dice.
If the universe looks like it's fine-tuned for complex life, maybe there's a fine-tuner. Maybe it was fine-tuned for life. And this has certain unsavory theological implications. And so it's not surprising that those committed to a fundamentally materialistic view of reality would try to find an escape hatch. And the most popular escape hatch for this theological implication of fine-tuning is this idea of multiple universes.
As its name suggests, the theory of multiple universes proposes that our universe is not alone. Instead, it is part of a vast ensemble of universes, each with a different set of laws and constants.
If there's only one universe, then the conclusion that the universe looks fine-tuned because it is fine-tuned is inescapable. But if our universe is just one of a vast set, then you seem to have more resources to play with. Chance gets a new lease on life. I sometimes try to imagine what physicists have in mind that postulate this idea of multiple universes. I mean, what would the generator look like that creates them? Maybe it's like a giant monolith that has dozens of different dials, each of which has to be set to the right physical constant.
If we think of these parameters as dials, each of the dials is different. So if you produce enough universes with enough different dial settings, eventually, just by chance, you get one just right. So you might have to produce a trillion universes. But eventually, if you have a generator that's just spitting out just an enormous number of them, then it gets the right dial setting. And then by just chance, you get conditions right for life. So it's a huge cosmic lottery. That's the idea.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, there's really only one problem with it. There's no independent evidence that it's true. Besides, it really just pushes the question back a step, because we could still ask, who built the generator?
The suggestion of multiple universes strikes me as a desperate attempt to explain away the obvious, which is that the universe is finely tuned by an intelligence to sustain complex life. An intelligence that must be beyond the constraints of time and space.
Well, I hope you liked the video. We can't have a real discussion of it since we're not really live here. We're not in class together, but just think about it. If you're watching it with someone else, your parents or brother or sister, talk a little bit about what came to your mind as you watched the film. What did you learn? Anything that you didn't know? Anything that that you thought really was good, or maybe something you had questions about or even disagreed with? And what was confusing that just seemed like neither agree or disagree because you just didn't understand it that much. So if you have a chance, have a little discussion there with whoever you're with. Just kind of a quick review. He talked about gravity, the fine tuning of gravity, that if you had a ruler that stretches the 14 billion light years of space, which is a very long way, and if you had a ruler that stretched that way, measuring inch by inch how far that was, if the setting for gravity, the force of gravity, was off by just 1 inch out of 14 billion light years, and that's not 14 billion miles, it's light years, the whole system would collapse on itself. So it is finely tuned almost beyond comprehension. And not only is it finely tuned, it stays that way. It doesn't change, it doesn't vary. The cosmological constant, that's a little more difficult concept. It's the energy density of empty space, and it's part of Einstein's equation for general relativity, and it could have had an enormous range of values. It could have been positive, negative, it could have been large and positive. And if that was the case, galaxies, stars, and planets would have never formed. If it was large and negative, then the universe would have collapsed upon itself. But it too is calibrated at exactly the right value in order for the universe to be life-friendly. So having all these, there's about 30 of these constants, 30 factors that are finely tuned, that any one of which, if it changed just a little bit, if it wasn't exactly as it is, we wouldn't be able to have life where we are. And it's like, compared like to throwing a dart from space at a long distance and having it hit a target the size of an atom. Something really absolutely inconceivable, just virtually impossible. And I say virtually impossible because, all things are possible, but how could this possibly be in the realm of anything that we would want to really seriously believe? One of the things that people talk about sometimes is it's the same probability you would have of a tornado hitting a junkyard, and the results being that somehow something as sophisticated as a Boeing 787 would be formed, or for that matter, even a car, or for that matter, even a box or a door. Pretty much just, something you wouldn't even consider, wouldn't even say is a possibility for that random tornado to rip through there and somehow assemble these parts. There is something they talk about in the book called intelligent design. I've studied that a great deal. And what that is really is just the idea that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause, not a random and undirected process. We talked about that a little bit last week when we covered theistic evolution, where they try to match up, some people try to match up the idea of a God as a creator and also Darwinian evolution. And I've talked to people that are pretty high up in that move to do that. And they are actually talking about Darwinian evolution, not some modified thing that says, yeah, God just appears to be using evolution, but it's really planned. No, they're talking about evolution that's unguided, unplanned, has nothing in mind. It's just running. And then they try to match that up with a creator. And that's where the problem to me is with theistic evolution. Intelligent design says that we look at these features, we look at things, and the best explanation is there's some sort of intelligent cause. Now, that doesn't get you to the God of the Bible necessarily, but it moves you away from science being just everything happening randomly, and it just sort of designs itself. Not true. There's got to be something going on outside there. We'll talk more about that in the next couple of weeks. One of the solutions to the highly improbable coming together of all these things is to say, well, there's multiverses. Multiverses just means there's lots of universes, multi meaning many, and verse having to do with universe. So they'll say, well, there just must be billions and trillions and almost an infinite number of multiverses. And so therefore, out of those multiverses, one of them is bound to have the right things for life to exist. And there's a few problems with that. One is there's no evidence for it. It's just an idea to try to get them out of trouble. And the other is, even if it were true, the question remains, who created the universe generating machine? Somebody has to be generating these universes. They have to be designed in some way. The material has to come from somewhere. You remember in the Kalam cosmological argument, we talked about anything that begins to exist has to have a cause. Well, if you have multiple universes coming into existence, something's got to be causing them. Another favorite of a lot of people is aliens. They talk about aliens landed on Earth and left behind people or something that evolved into people, and that's where we came from. Now, the very low chance of any planet having just the right conditions, we already talked about that. It's very, very rare. And so scientists believe that life elsewhere is a lot more unlikely than maybe they previously thought. I think previously people would say, well, it's such a big universe, there must be other planets with really smart people. And you've all seen the science fiction shows with people like Dr. Spock and others that, and the Klingons and so forth, that are out there in space. But there's no evidence of that at all, really. And to tell you the truth, with aliens, one way or the other, it's kind of a non-issue. The Bible doesn't exclude the possibility of aliens. The Bible is a story of life on Earth. And it doesn't say that God didn't create another planet somewhere, nor does it say he did. The point being, if you say, well, it must be aliens, you're not really attacking the Bible. You're just coming up with another theory. And even if aliens did exist, the question still is, where did they come from? You just move the question further back and say, where did the aliens come from? So you really don't answer the question. I have one other video I'd like to show you. This one's a little more sophisticated, maybe, than Strobel's video was, but I think it just also just kind of gives you a little bit more the impact of how improbable this is and how many things there are. Lee only mentioned a couple of them: gravity, cosmological constant. This video mentions quite a few others. Take a look at this. Don't worry about trying to memorize any of this stuff. I just want you to know there's a lot of evidence that says this is a really special place that we live in, and it sounds like and seems like it was created for us.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body. or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
Okay, well, I hope you found that interesting, even though maybe it's a little bit complicated and kind of fast moving, but it gives you an idea of just how complex this whole thing is and how improbable it is that this just happened by itself, pulled itself together out of nothing. Very, very complicated set of elements that have to be brought together for us to have life. I don't expect you to remember all the details of this, and I realize you may feel like your head's exploding trying to look at all this stuff, and you may not understand a lot of it. And if there's anything that you seriously have a question with, be sure and email me or give me a call. I'd love to talk to you about it, or write it down, and we'll talk about it when we get back together in class in April. But the main thing, I want you to see it. I want you to have been exposed to it, because I want you to just remember that there are very good responses to those who say science disproves God's existence. And among them are the problems with evolution, the fine-tuning argument, the intelligent design arguments, and we'll see some more in the weeks ahead as well. So that's the main thing I want you to remember, so that if you encounter now in the near future, or when you get to college or even beyond, someone telling you these things, you'll know that there are answers, and you'll know where to go and look for them and get them and be able to present them to them if they have an open mind. And if they don't have an open mind, at least you'll know that they're not really telling you anything that you would change your beliefs in God. So with that, we'll move on to the next section. So the assignment today is to watch this video, to then read chapter 4 of The Case for Christ, Student Edition, which you have. And then I'd like you to fill in the blanks on the notes page. I sent you that by email. It covers the things that you've read and the things that you've seen in this video. And then I'd like you to scan or take a picture of your completed notes page and return it to me by email. My email address is tedshawn@me.com. If you didn't get a copy of the notes page for some reason, email me at this address and I will send you a copy. Then for next week, I'd like you to read chapter 5 of The Case for Christ, Student Edition. And then I'd like you to watch next week's video, and I'll send you the link and we'll pick it up from there. We'll have 3 of these online courses. Then we break for Easter, and then we'll be back in person to finish up the rest of the course. Remember, as you go out of your house, that you're entering the servant's entrance to serve the people, to tell people about Jesus, to encourage people that believe in Jesus, and to help people understand that the world is full of illusions, and there are a lot of things that they may think look appealing or seem to be a good way to do things, and maybe they're just not. And perhaps you can help them to understand that. And remember, as always, that the people you encounter don't know the things you know. They haven't studied the things you've studied. They may never have heard the truth, so be patient with them. And during the next few weeks, as we have this coronavirus disrupting our lives and the world, we may well have an opportunity to share our faith in Christ's love with others. I have seen an incredible outreach on people in my own family and people outside my family, helping other people, buying their groceries for them, running errands for them, just sitting with them and helping comfort them and calm them down in this time. I've seen a lot of Christians out there doing a lot of good. So it seems that no matter how bad things may seem, there's always a lot of good at work, and God's behind all of that. So remember, too, as apologists, we are always studying arguments and the facts and trying to get to the truth and the absolute truth and all that. And we have complex arguments and some that are a little simpler. But remember that sometimes people don't so much need our arguments or explanations as much as they just need someone who cares to sit down and talk to them. So please be conscious of that as well. If you find someone that you think is hurting, or they're having questions about their faith or wondering about God because they've never had any faith, remember they may need someone just as much to talk to them and then gently lead them to the cross. So folks, as always, go out there and give them heaven. I'd like to pray for us, and then we'll be done till next week. Please pray with me. Eternal Father, thank you for this opportunity to continue our class even in the face of disruptions such as we've seen. Thank you that you've given us the internet and the ability to provide these videos and this training so that we can join together as the body of Christ here in the Apologetics class to learn more about the truth and to learn more about how to set that truth loose into a world that is desperate for the truth. So Lord, I pray that each one of us will be challenged. Each one of the students and me will all be challenged this week and have an opportunity to share the truth with someone, to share the love of Jesus with someone, to share the hope we have with Jesus. We ask these things in his name, Lord, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thanks, guys. See you next week.